How does content creation change the way you experience games? Something that's been on my mind a lot lately is the way my relationship with games has changed so much over the last few years. So many people want to be a content creator, especially in the gaming industry, for fame or fortune, or just to escape the mundane horror of the modern working world. Many think that all you do is sit there playing games, which of course sounds like an absolute dream job. If only it really was that simple. For me, it started as a creative outlet, which slowly grew into something more. But while each step along the way has led to some of the best things that have ever happened to me, I can't help but see the downsides too. And don't get me wrong, in the grand scheme of things, these downsides are small, and this is far better than any of the jobs I've had in the past. This video is not a lament about my first world problems. But even if you're not one of those who hope to build a community of your own, it's still important to understand that any content creator will inevitably look at games from a different perspective to you. If you ever listen to what creators say, this should matter to you. Let's start with one of the most fundamental differences. One of the most powerful reasons people play games is for the sense of immersion. You have direct control over the events that happen, and the best games make it so easy to get sucked into another world until before you know it, hours have disappeared. This goes for everything from simple puzzles to competitive games to epic single-player adventures. Other entertainment can achieve this too, but the sheer level of interactivity provided by games makes that state of immersion far more accessible, and their structure means it can last for a long time. Immersion is often what gamers crave the most, and it's the first thing which goes out the window the moment you start creating content. If there's one feeling I would imagine all gamers hate, it's being locked into your favorite game only for something to interrupt you mid-flow. Countless parents have been cursed out for doing such an evil thing. When you're enjoying yourself, it feels almost physically painful to tear yourself away from what you were doing and switch your attention to something else. And it's even worse in games you cannot pause. The moment you start streaming to an audience, that level of immersion becomes impossible. Unless you're one of the rare few who gain an audience for skill alone, streaming is a constant back and forth between the streamer and the chat, complete with distracting sound alerts announcing a whole host of interruptions. For larger streamers, their chat is a flood of reactions and responses to everything they do and say, and the ability to turn that into an engaging conversation is an incredibly underrated skill. For smaller streamers, the experience is different. The slower pace leaves space for more in-depth and interactive discussions instead, and you have to be really good at either carrying on a conversation with a whole bunch of people at the same time, or sparking new ones with interesting observations when the last one peters out. And this can have a much bigger effect than you might realize. One of my favorite games of all time is Horizon Zero Dawn, and when its sequel was announced, I was so excited to share that experience with my community. But I just did not enjoy streaming it. I was torn between wanting to immerse myself in the next chapter of Aloy's story and that need to keep the conversation going. My community were adamant that they enjoyed just watching me play, but I couldn't stop myself from losing immersion every few seconds and ended up dropping it. I still haven't found the time to play off stream. And even when you're not streaming, if you create the kinds of analysis videos I find the most satisfying to work on, you're always looking at every game you play with a critical eye, forever on the lookout for something interesting to talk about. Even if you don't create those kinds of videos, you're expected to have a perspective, and while you can make a conscious effort to just exist and enjoy the game for what it is, there will always be something working in the back of your mind to collect those important insights. I already have more video ideas listed in my notes than I could create in 2 years, and yet I just cannot turn this off. And I wouldn't want to. The best videos are the ones where something compelling appears out of nowhere and you must talk about it, even if it means pushing back something else you've been planning for far longer. For me, this is something which only seems to happen with games. I spend just as much time talking about the pros and cons of books and films and TV, and yet I don't approach those with an analytical mindset at first, and instead that side of things comes out later on. For some reason, with games it's just permanently on for me now. I'm currently playing Expedition 33 and I'm constantly thinking I should note that down, or that's an interesting thing to talk about, and have been recording all of the gameplay just in case. All of this is vastly different from how a normal person will experience the game, and it will inevitably change my perspective on it, which will come across in any videos I happen to make about it. Even that little extra effort to switch on my PC so I can record the gameplay introduces some friction which does not exist for most people. While I'm sure many YouTubers have managed to avoid this problem, I'd imagine that just as many have this subtly abnormal experience with everything they cover. It's not necessarily a bad thing. After all, a fresh perspective often brings the most interesting insights, but it does add a little disconnect. Another big difference is that professional content creators usually have so much more time to play games than people who have any other job, so their experience with any given game is often wildly different to the average person. Even hardcore gamers usually need to spend much of their waking hours earning money instead of playing games. This difference is especially stark for live service games and is the root cause of some of the most repetitive discussions in the space. Since I keep up with Genshin Impact and Wuthering Waves personally, I'll use those as examples, but the same likely applies to other games too. First, the complaint that they don't have enough content. Anytime these games release a new patch, the most prominent parts of the communities will blaze through all the new content in the space of a couple of days and then have almost nothing to do for the next 6 weeks. All that's left are time-limited events, self-imposed challenges, and any endgame modes available, and the endless grind for upgrades. The games feel like an empty wasteland. I've done this myself many times, but this is not the intended experience of the game. While some people will dedicate an entire weekend so they can binge through all that content in one go, it seems more likely that most people would only have a little time to play each day, and that the volume of content is tailored to those players rather than the hardcore ones. After all, by definition, the hardcore fans are a minority. For example, I have a second Genshin account so I can relate to the free-to-play perspective, and it's been far less effort to keep up with than you might think. Each day, I explore until I opened enough chests to complete my dailies, then spend my resin and log out. This usually takes 15 minutes or less, and feels like a refreshingly low-effort way to keep up with the game, much closer to the experience those average players have. The interesting part is that by doing this consistently, I completed enough of the exploration to unlock the maximum reward for map completion in the latest region. Those incentives encourage people to complete 80% of the game's content within a couple of months of release, and 15 minutes per day was more than enough to meet the expectations. For people who take that more measured approach and add a few extra days where they play a quest for an hour or so as well, there's a perfect amount of content. It's only from our warped perspective as content creators or hyper-dedicated players that the patches seem too lightweight. The moment it starts to feel that way, it might just be a sign that you should spend some time playing something else. And to take that further, many content creators spend all that extra time dedicated to the grind. They optimize their character builds until they're far ahead of what most players would ever dream of. They repeat the endgame content over and over to get a perfect run. They practice with their favorite characters so they can solo the hardest content, and much more. This is, again, wildly different to the experience of an average player. I wish we could get some accurate stats on this for the player base as a whole, but, for example, one of the few sources we do have is PlayStation trophy unlock rates. The trophies themselves are so inconsistent that they only give us a blurry impression of the truth, but we can see that roughly half of dedicated Genshin players have completed the endgame at least once, so we can conclude that less than half of the players completed regularly. The subset of players who do things like speedrun to try to optimize their strategies is going to be tiny. For Wuwa, it's a little harder to gauge. The audience likely skews a little more towards combat-focused players, but the PlayStation release was comparatively recent, which will affect the stats. What we can say is that most players who completed the story have at least unlocked the final section of the endgame, but less than a fifth have completed it so far. We can probably expect that number to increase over time as PlayStation players' accounts mature. It'll be interesting to see what level it reaches in the end. And remember, this is the percentage of people who completed the endgame once. It doesn't say whether they do so every time, or just occasionally, or maybe just one time to show that they could and haven't bothered ever since. Both of these games have a hardcore, dedicated fanbase, and a lot of content creators cater to them, which makes a lot of sense, since that's a ready-made, highly active audience with a lot of passion. But it likely only chimes with a smaller portion of the players, and people watching who are curious about trying out the game may end up with a warped perspective of what they should expect. And this points to why my Twitch streams have always had so many people coming in to say they're fairly new to Genshin and feeling overwhelmed and are struggling to understand the basics of what the guides are telling them to do, including the ones touted as beginner-friendly. When you spend all your time immersed in this culture of diving deeper and deeper into the game, it's so easy to start taking nuanced understandings of complex systems for granted, and to lose sight of how little someone totally new to the game would know. When you've played a game for years, that early experience is hard to relate to. All of this is why I made some guides to explain the absolute basics of Genshin, and why I took the time to start a fresh new account so that I could refresh my memories of the experience. That account has been valuable even outside of that. For example, the Imaginarium Theatre, a controversial endgame mode which incentivizes players to use a wider variety of characters. It has been pretty fun on my account most of the time because I have 80 characters fully built and enjoy the variety. I could see right from the start that it would be less fun for other people, but actually experiencing experiencing multiple cycles on my alt account made a massive difference to my opinion on that game mode as a whole, because there's nothing quite the same as feeling that frustration for yourself. Even when a creator is conscious that their experience differs from the average player, it's still easy to fall into that trap. This huge disparity in time investment sets unrealistic expectations within the community and leads to toxic elitism, which drives curious people away, instead of welcoming them and helping these games we love become more successful. It also means that up-and-coming content creators often feel they have to also be good at the end game, since otherwise their perspective won't be seen as something worth listening to, even if they actually want to focus on other aspects of the game. A number of times I've had comments on my videos about the story of these games, questioning whether or not I'm good enough to complete the endgame is ridiculous. The fact that I have completed the endgame in both, and can therefore prove my credentials, does not make it any better. A combat expert will have a more nuanced perspective on some parts of a game, but ignoring someone's perspective on the story until they confirm whether or not they've completed some unrelated combat challenges is simply weird. When you're watching content by creators who dedicate so much of their time to a handful of games, it's important to value their expertise, but it's also essential to remember just how far from the typical players their experience actually is. Content creation also skews the types of games you choose to play. For one thing, it's far easier to build an audience if you consistently cover one popular game, and if you try to create content about many, then you're always at a disadvantage, since every time you switch, there will be some subset of your community who are just not interested in the next game you pick up. I have diverse tastes in what games I like to play, but I was conscious of this from the start. For years before I ever clicked go live or even thought of recording a video, I was a custom content creator for The Sims 4. I used a 3D meshing program to create hairstyles and clothes that other people could install into their game, and built up a substantial audience who loved my creations. When I started streaming, I focused almost entirely on The Sims. That game has several very different game modes, so there's always enough variety for it to stay fresh, but I always hoped to take that leap and cover all of those other games I enjoyed playing. After building up a healthy audience, I slowly started spreading out to more diverse games. And by slowly, I mean that I took years to make that change. These days, there are people who show up to chill and enjoy deep conversations with my community, even if they have zero interest in the game I'm playing. I'll forever be grateful for that. And yet, I still think long and hard before considering any game to stream. For example, while I love games which tell a compelling story, there's an inevitable conflict within me whenever I play them on stream. On one hand, they can feel like watching an interactive movie together, but on the other, as a smaller streamer, my community are mostly there for the in-depth conversations we tend to have. When playing these games, there may be long stretches of dialogue or action where I kinda need to keep silent so people can focus on the story, and I'm always conscious that I'm basically ignoring my chat when this happens. But the alternative isn't great either. Sometimes when I'm playing a quest, people get super chatty even if it's unrelated to the game, and when I keep pausing to take part in the conversation, it likely gets frustrating for anyone lurking to catch the story. Or, for example, puzzle games can be frustrating too. I love taking my time to work my way through an interesting puzzle, especially if it's challenging. But the moment you do this in front of an audience, it's almost inevitable that someone will feel compelled to help you, which then spoils all the fun. And even if they hold back from telling you the solution, there's always those little comments which make it clear that they're just bursting with the desire to help, which makes the whole thing feel like you've got a ticking time bomb right beside you. These considerations add an extra filter for which games a content creator would choose to play. Even if they'd enjoy them most of the time, they might just feel it's not quite right for streaming. As a result, there are many games which don't get the light of day. And even if you have a community which would enjoy a story game, there are other big issues with those. People who play a game themselves may want to avoid spoilers, so it's pretty common for some who would like to hang out and chat to just say they'll catch you next time since they want to play it on their own. And for those who do stick around, while the first stream of a story is usually a great experience for everyone, that momentum quickly dies away. People can't make it to every stream, or even if they can, they might just have to drop out for some part of it, so most will end up missing entire sections of the story. And who wants to just see random assorted scenes which make little sense in isolation? Despite their disappointing storytelling in general, live service gacha games tend to provide a balance which avoids this problem. Their stories are released in smaller chapters, which are usually short enough that you can complete them in one go, and are spaced out enough that people have ample opportunity to catch up. I still tend to wait until later in the patch cycle before I play them, partly because I'm rarely all that hyped for the story, but also because it helps avoid this problem. We get the fun time of experiencing it together without people worrying about spoilers. The big downside is that it means I miss out out on any hype from the initial launch, and by the time I put together my thoughts to make a video about it, any boost to the algorithm is long gone. The same goes for my character reviews. I tend to wait until a rerun to post anything because half of what I want to say is about who the character is and how they fit into the story, rather than just reading out their kit description and theorizing about teams and equipment. After years of sleepless nights playing catch-up to create Sims 4 mesh edits as soon as possible after every new pack's release, I'm done chasing that train. I'll create what I want, when I want, and hope that the things which interest me catch someone else's eye as well. And it's worth noting a related problem which can get quite frustrating. When I covered Infinity Nikki's horrendous issues recently, a lot of people came in with the assumption that I'm just a grifter covering it for the sake of getting some views. After all, I've mostly covered Genshin and a little bit of Wuwa on my YouTube so far. But the fact is that creators often don't cover all the games they like. I'm here to create content about games I find interesting, but I do not have enough time to create content about all the games I enjoy. And even if they do cover a specific game, they might not on all their platforms. While I hadn't created videos focused on Nikki on my YouTube, since its launch it has been my most streamed game on Twitch, and I played it a ton off stream as well. I had planned to write a glowing review, but other subjects kept jumping the queue. After all, I expected any video about Nikki to be of less interest to my audience here, so I would only be creating it for my own sake. And the other creators who covered it even though they're not Nikki fans at all? The only way to get companies to listen is for discussions like this to gain wider traction. It sucks, but that's the world we live in. Anyone who covered the subject in a respectful and informational way was helping, especially if it meant the news was spread to a wider audience. The algorithm already pushes creators to focus down into smaller niches. We shouldn't reinforce that by yelling at anyone who does join the conversation in good faith. There are other subtle pressures like these which influence which games a content creator will play in public, or even talk about at all, or alter their experience with the ones they choose. For every game they might want to play, a creator has to consider whether it will be a good experience for the audience, or whether they're happy to take a financial loss in order to spend time playing something less popular just because they want to. On the other hand, sponsorships may tip them from being unsure to at least giving something a fair chance, even if they would not have found the time otherwise. Exactly how this affects their content will be unique for every game a creator plays. Many people seem to expect content creators to have a similar experience with games as they do. Pick a few favorites and spend most of your time playing those alone, but that's often not how it works. This is part of why it's always valuable to get multiple perspectives on anything before you buy anything, or to make up your own mind about a game before you go searching for what other people thought. And those are just the most blatant ways that content creation changes your experience with games. There are a whole host of aspects of content creation which I've been thinking about for years, which only have a tangential effect on your experience with games themselves, but have a huge effect on other things as well. Every single one of these is deep enough to deserve an entire dedicated video, but let's quickly summarize some of the more prominent ones. Creators often feel algorithmic pressure, especially when their main motivation is to chase success. When the algorithm rewards you for creating certain types of content, it's a compelling pull towards creating more of the same. The algorithm shapes what content gains traction, and as a result, many creators feel pressured to cater to its whims. After all, it's often the way they pay the bills, so making sure they can keep the views rolling in is vital, even if it means they're not quite making the content they would have created otherwise. My most successful videos so far by a long distance are the two covering the utter meltdown of one of my favorite games. I could double down on that and start creating similar videos about other dumpster fires, but there are too many other things that I'm far more interested in talking about, so that's not going to happen. The same goes when it comes to picking what games to play. Despite many commenters assuming that I only cover Genshin because it pays the bills, it doesn't, and I do so because I want to. There's also the age-old dichotomy of intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is when your desire to do something comes from within you. You want to play a game because you like the experience, or create videos because you enjoy the creative process, and so on. Extrinsic motivations means the desire comes from external rewards, money, attention, recognition. People often find something they absolutely love to do, and the modern world tells them they should monetize it, or even better, turn it into their day job. And then when they do, they find that their love for it fades away. A major factor in this is that they went from intrinsic motivation to extrinsic, which for many people can suck all the joy out of things they used to love. Fortunately for me, my intrinsic motivation for the things I do is still far stronger than my extrinsic motivation, so this hasn't been a problem yet. And of course, there's always the risk of burnout. As I mentioned earlier, content creators spend a lot of time playing games, and actually playing is only a small part of being a creator. Any professional creator is a small business owner too, with all that entails. Taxes, contracts, planning, writing, editing, dealing with employees or contractors if you get to that point, and so much more. And in the ideal world, they would also spend a ton of time engaging with other creators' content, building friendships, helping, and just generally being present and visible in the wider community. And all that on top of somehow finding time to actually play the games. And if you want to play some for leisure too, then good luck. I have taken 1 week off since I started streaming in 2020, and even before then only 2 more while I was creating Sims content in the previous 4 years. I always feel an intense pressure to be productive and guilt when I need a break, and it's one of the reasons I burnt out of creating Sims content, though certain other issues pushed me over the edge there. I've absolutely felt the beginnings of burnout when it comes to streaming, and I struggle to even take a day off when I'm sick. But the last thing I ever want to happen is to lose that love for playing games, so this is one I'm actively working to avoid. While a typical gamer can of course burn themselves out playing a game too much, when it's your livelihood that's on the line, it's a whole different type of pressure. Audience capture describes what happens when a creator is too strongly influenced by their audience's approval or the attention they receive. When they get positive feedback from something, for example from playing a game their audience likes, or expressing views that resonate with them, or perhaps even bullying other content creators, they double down and take it even further. This can lead to a feedback loop with increasingly extreme behavior, and sometimes the creator can even warp their personality to match the expectations of their audience. To some extent, this can be positive, since it can be just a case of people who like the same things building up each other's excitement. However, it feels like the negative side is more prevalent, with creators crashing out while being egged on by their community. It can be difficult to separate your honest, personal perspective from the fire hose of positive and negative feedback which you have to deal with if your content gains any traction, but it's essential if you want your voice to be authentic. Dramaturgical theory is the idea that every social interaction resembles a theatrical performance. The sides of your personality that you show to your family are different to the ones your friends see, or the ones you bring to work, or share with your partner, or even show a stranger you meet on the subway. I know some streamers who talk about deliberately putting a mask on while they're alive, and how every minute they're in front of their audience feels like they're playing a role. From what they've said, it's like a balancing act which takes constant mental effort, which sounds exhausting to me. Others are more genuine, but deliberately exaggerate their emotions for engagement. I do, of course, have some subconscious filters which sometimes show up. For example, something about playing The Sims makes me far less likely to swear despite being a horrid little potty mouth, but I'm comfortable being my authentic self while live, to the extent that it's possible to be anyway. I sometimes even feel this in the other direction. When I share about personal things I'm dealing with, it leaves me feeling very vulnerable for days, and I question whether being so open is really the right thing to do. Now imagine trying to enjoy a game while all of that is swirling around your head. And finally, parasocial relationships are talked about a lot. When you spend a lot of time watching someone's content, it's easy to start feeling like you know that person, and as a result, a one-sided relationship can form. While YouTube very clearly follows that classic pattern, streaming takes it in a different direction, since the viewers can interact with the creator in real time and build up some degree of actual relationship, especially with smaller streamers. But what's never talked about is the reverse, the relationship that creator feels towards their audience. For larger content creators, this is probably more abstract, but as a smaller creator, I do care about the individuals in my community, even the ones who mostly lurk, even though I recognize that I don't really know them. I notice when people who used to be around go missing. It's an indescribable feeling to have someone you care about on some level disappear and then pop in months or years later to tell you that you helped them through the toughest time in their life and gave them the help they needed. And then, because they didn't need you anymore, they just left you behind. It's not something you get used to. I don't know how common it is for other creators to feel this way, but it's one of those things that sometimes makes me feel like maybe I'm not built for this. Outside of the content creation space, it's pretty normal for the opinions of those around you to affect your perspective on things. These unusual relationships between the creator and their community, especially when streaming, can have a similar effect as well, especially when combined with the audience capture effect. The entire purpose of games is to give you an entertaining experience, and at their best, they can make the worries of the world just fade away for some blissful moments. While in many ways it is a dream job to make a living by playing and talking about games, some of that special spark does get dimmed by the experience. It's important to be aware that many creators do follow the algorithm in the hopes of getting views, and at the same time it's vital to recognize that others don't. It can be tempting to find a creator you like and take all their perspectives at face value, or to dismiss someone entirely just because they like a game you don't or said something you disagree with in the past. Instead, we should engage with the arguments behind people's opinions and embrace the fact that others have different perspectives and experiences which may be vastly different from our own. If someone has a different point of view, maybe that's a good thing. Until next time.